Hi, everybody. Welcome to the event for this evening. My name is Melissa, if we haven't met before, and I work in operations at the Conservation Council of Western Australia. I use she, her pronouns. It's a real pleasure to have you all here tonight in the lead up to the WA state election for our forum on climate, energy, and environment. I am dialing in from the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people in Victoria Park, where I am very blessed to live and work. I was born at Te Akade in Montreal on Mohawk land, and I pay my respects to the elders of the Whadjuk Noongar people, past, present, and emerging, and to the native peoples of my homeland. First of all, thanks for your patience as we had to change the format for the event this evening. I think there was a little bit of confusion even up to the last minute, but we are not having a candidates debate, very unfortunately, but also maybe fortunately, because we get to talk about other things. Just with the COVID restrictions, we could have only had 20 of us in the room, including staff and including the candidates themselves. So we're taking the opportunity tonight to shift gears a little bit. We know that an overwhelming majority of Western Australians support action on climate change and measures to protect the people, animals, and places that we love. Tonight, you have the opportunity to hear firsthand what various organizations are working towards in terms of reducing our fossil fuel pollution and harnessing the enormous job opportunities in the clean energy economy emerging worldwide and at home in WA. So the main focus tonight is some of our objectives for the state. We've got a bold vision for the future of WA. We're talking about that in the lead up to the state election and what our asks to the state government are, whomever they should be. So that is an overview of what we're on for tonight. Just a couple of Zoom things before we kick off officially. If everybody could please stay on mute throughout the duration of the event, there are quite a number of people on the call. So just to keep things nice and enjoyable and manageable for everybody on the call, if you do have questions or comments, if you could please put them into the chat box instead of coming off mute and asking them. I've got colleagues who are going to be collecting and collating those questions throughout the evening, and we'll have several opportunities to go through your questions and ask them to the speakers, both throughout the evening and at the end. So just to repeat, if you could please put your questions in the chat and just know that all of them are being taken by my colleagues, and we will have a chance to ask them later in the evening. If you would like to switch between views in Zoom, if you go up to the top right-hand corner, you can switch the view from gallery view to speaker view. So if you click on speaker view, you should only see the person who's speaking. So that'll be either myself as I'm emceeing this evening, or the members of the organizations that we have invited here to speak. Does that sound good? Can you give me a little finger wave if that's all making sense? Nice. Amazing. Okay, thanks everybody. I really appreciate your cooperation on that. I've lost my soul, sorry. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we are going to be recording this event tonight. So if you're not comfortable having your face visible, not that it would be because we're going to record it on speaker view, but if you would rather stay off of video, that is totally fine. And we are also asking all speakers this evening, if you're a speaker, you can prick your ear up now, to please record yourself as you speak also on your phone, because RTR-FM is going to be developing the conversations that we have this evening into a podcast. And they've asked that we have like a fresh phone recording just so the quality is very good. So if you're a speaker, if you could just get your phone ready as I continue to ramble on and buy you a little bit of time to do so, just to record yourself as you're speaking, that would be great for RTR-FM. So yeah, you can totally take photos and share messages of our speakers as well with your friends and family and your followers on Instagram or Facebook or wherever you share things. Definitely feel free to do so. And without further ado, we'll get into our speakers. So our first speaker tonight probably needs no introduction in a space such as this full of environmentalists from across WA. We're going to hear from Conservation Council's Director, Piers Verstegen. Piers and the advocacy team at the Conservation Council have been hard at work over the last few months, putting together our vision for the state for the upcoming election and beyond. It's really bold and really exciting and builds off of the work that we've been doing on the clean economy and all of the opportunities for growth and success and vibrancy that work holds for Western Australia. It's really exciting to be able to share this work with you this evening. And yeah, without further ado, Piers, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Melissa, and welcome everyone. Kaya. I'm also on the Whadjuk Noongar land, and I would also like to acknowledge our Whadjuk Noongar elders and also traditional owners. We're going to be talking a little bit about that a little bit later, but certainly acknowledge them. And I'm calling in I'm the only person in the Conservation Council office because everyone else is working from home. And yeah, I love Melissa's saying that we've got an advocacy team at the Conservation Council. Makes us sound much bigger than we are, but that's what we like because this is important stuff. And we're trying to get some environmental issues onto the agenda for the state election. So yeah, we're just going to give you a bit of a briefing on the policy priorities that we've developed together with some of the member groups of the Conservation Council. We're really proud to be launching that, and hopefully we'll see a bit of media coverage of that over the next few days if casinos and COVID and other things give us a bit of space. And yeah, I just wanted to take you through what we're actually putting forward this time for the election. It's a rather strange election, but elections are still a really important opportunity for advocacy. It's when political parties are looking to make new promises, new commitments for the coming term of government. And it's important that we're putting forward an agenda and showing leadership in how to solve some of the challenging environmental issues that we're facing in this state and grasp the opportunities that we are presented with. So I'm just going to actually, I don't know if you can see me, I can see Melissa, but I'm going to share my screen and hopefully we'll be able to get the presentation underway. Okay. So can everyone see that? Give us a thumbs up. That's great. So yeah, we're really, we've been working a little bit in the last couple of months on creating a really bold vision for conservation, climate and communities in Western Australia. And it's always our job to be putting forward policy solutions to environmental issues as the Conservation Council, the peak group that's representing about 105 now community groups around Western Australia. Many of you are no doubt on the line from different member organisations and supporters of the Conservation Council. So thanks for your support and being with us this evening. Obviously, our environment and communities are really facing some huge challenges at the moment. We've just seen the big fires in the hills as another reminder of the impacts of climate change, but there's lots of other challenges for our environment. There's millions of hectares that are degraded in Western Australia due to salinity and drought, and our regional communities are really struggling. In the southwest, we're sacrificing nature and wildlife with the logging industry for very little economic return, and that's holding back opportunities with more sustainable industries. We've also got really high pollution industries like the LNG industry that is not only damaging the climate, but is also harming the competitiveness of our economy because it's making us a really high pollution economy. And the workers in those industries, they don't have a lot of job security and they don't really have any clear transition path to cleaner alternatives at the moment. So we need a new way of thinking that unites our communities behind solutions to these issues and solutions that benefit all West Australians, particularly those that have been left behind by the shape of our economy, or people that are vulnerable. And it's really important that when we present solutions, we look after those people in our communities and those communities that that need a hand as well. So that's what our thinking has been behind putting this proposals together. And really, this is based on a new way of thinking. We think that action on climate change is the greatest development opportunity in WA's history, and that it has transformative potential for businesses and communities in every sector. And we also know that Western Australians will vote for a clean economy and a healthy environment. We've been doing some polling, and we've been showing really, it's been showing really strong support for the kinds of initiatives that we've been putting forward. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But it's very important that we put this polling in front of the political parties, because they don't usually do their own polling on environmental issues. But certainly we're hearing from the polling that action on climate change and conservation is actually a vote changer. And it's something that West Australians are really looking for when they're going to cast their vote at the election. So this is our launch, our first kind of exposure of this bold vision for conservation. And I'm going to go through each of these different goals or initiatives in sequence and tell you a little bit about them, how we can achieve them. Some of them will be a little bit familiar to you. Others will look, hopefully, a bit different from what we've been presenting in the past. But really, this is a new kind of initiative for our state. We're really excited to be launching this and to be able to present this initiative. We know these goals are not things that government can deliver alone. So it's not something that government is capable of achieving by itself. We actually need all parts of the community to be working together to deliver these kinds of goals. We need investment from the private sector. We need government to be putting the policies in place and obviously leading the way in many cases. But we also need the private sector, we need communities, we need the not-for-profit sector to get behind these kinds of goals and aspirations for our state. But we think this is the right future for Western Australia, and these are the initiatives that we're going to be putting forward and calling on all political parties to support. So I'll just go through them a little bit. The first one is about clean jobs and creating 350,000 clean jobs by 2025. And I'll tell you a little bit how we get to those numbers, but I think it's really important that we frame, when we're discussing conservation and climate change initiatives, we talk about the potential to create jobs, because this has been something that's been actually holding us back in the national and political conversation on climate change. Actually, action on climate change creates thousands of jobs, and this is one of the first things we can do, is set a clean jobs target for our state. We launched the Clean State Jobs Plan not so long ago, and many of you will be familiar with the different initiatives in there around energy, buildings, transport, green metals, and the conservation economy, of course, and the public sector. And that plan talks about creating many new jobs in new industries that can actually decarbonise our state and help take action on climate change. But what we realised is that actually it's not just those new jobs that we should be focusing on, but actually many of the existing jobs, almost all jobs, can become a clean job, because industries and employers can actually take action to decarbonise and reduce their pollution and reduce their emissions. So there are a lot of, and just over the next 5 years, by 2025, we think it's possible to create 70,000 new jobs in industries like renewable energy, carbon farming, sustainable tourism, green metals and conservation, the ones I've just run you through. But we also think that we can target 280,000 existing jobs to be made clean in workplaces that cut their pollution. And they can do that in lots of different ways. You'll be familiar with the key ways to cut pollution. But over 90,000 jobs actually would be made clean in Western Australia if just 10 of the state's biggest polluters became carbon neutral. So that's the first ambitious goal that we're putting forward for Western Australia, 350,000 clean jobs to be made up of both new jobs in new industries that are clean and also existing jobs in industries made clean. And that's a really inclusive goal. That means that almost anybody and almost any workplace can participate in helping to achieve that goal. Renewable energy is, of course, something that we all want to see more of, and the polling certainly shows that Western Australians want to see more renewable energy and are willing to vote for that. And there's been targets talked about in the past and argued about by various different political parties. We think the opportunity is there just to leapfrog the whole conversation that's been occurring around renewable energy and actually be much more ambitious in this space. So we've set a target actually for 700% renewable energy, and that might seem a lot. That's a target that's been endorsed by the World Wildlife Fund for Australia, and they're campaigning on that nationally, but also the chair of ARENA, the government's renewable energy agency. And I'll just talk you through what that actually means, what a target for 700% renewable energy means. The first step, obviously, is meeting our current electricity demand. The Southwest Interconnected System and the Northwest System, if we meet that entirely through renewable energy, which we can do, we call that 100% renewable energy. The second step is that there's new industries and also electrification, making other industries that aren't powered by electricity, powered by renewable energy. So we can do that with the transport industry that obviously uses a lot of diesel and petrol and gas, mining and other industries that aren't connected to the grid at the moment, but use a lot of other forms of energy. And we can grow those sectors and grow things like the clean metals and green metals manufacturing and processing here. And so we think that that can actually easily achieve up to 200% renewable energy. That will actually double the amount of renewable energy that we would use here domestically just for our own economy. But then, of course, we've got this huge potential in WA to export our renewable energy. This is the best place in the world to be developing wind and solar resources. And we can actually export that through shipping hydrogen fuels. Some companies are talking about subsea cables to export renewable energy. But also we can export renewable energy in the form of manufactured products like green steel. It's actually, we think it's possible easily within Western Australia to achieve 700% renewable energy based on adding up that domestic need and also what we can be exporting. So this is an opportunity to be much more ambitious than we have been. And when I say this is the biggest opportunity for industrial development in Western Australia, I think that this kind of target really should grab some attention, and it really is what's possible for our state if we've got leadership and support from the different parts of the economy in our community. We need to halve carbon pollution by 2030, and the state government has set a goal of net zero emissions by 2050, which is in line with the Paris Agreement, but currently there's no plan to achieve that, and no targets have been set for 2030 or earlier. So we actually last year commissioned the first Paris-aligned carbon budget for Western Australia. That sets out the amount of pollution that we can afford to produce to stay within the temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. And of course, it shows that pollution must go down immediately, and we must achieve a 50% reduction by 2030 at the latest. Now, what we know is that if pollution keeps rising like it has been, then to stay within that carbon budget, we'll need even deeper cuts in the future. So it's really important that we start getting the emissions down now. And we know that's possible with existing technology, and that will produce economic benefits for our state. And it will create thousands of jobs, lower cost energy, and it will provide exciting opportunities for communities and businesses across WA. So halving carbon pollution by 2030 is a goal that is possible and a goal that we should be setting for our state. And that's the graph out of the carbon budget that shows how the different sectors can be decarbonised over time and achieve that 50% reduction within 10 years, and then net zero emissions before 2050. And this is based on Western Australia's industrial sectors and our makeup. Conservation is also a really important issue for our regions and for our country. There's big challenges, as I outlined previously, with our regional areas and with conservation across vast areas that are degraded at the moment here in Western Australia and subject to climate change and other impacts. So we actually need a new vision for joined up land management and conservation across all land tenures. It's not sufficient. We do need to keep focusing on expanding the conservation estate and protected areas, but we also need ways of managing land that go across all land tenures, including private land, leasehold land, pastoral land, which is the majority of the state. And that means that we have to engage different communities and different land managers and landowners and traditional owners in partnerships. So this is really a new approach to engaging communities in ways that benefits their economies, creates jobs, but also provides opportunities for joined up land management across different land tenures. And so we've looked into this, and we think that 2,500 conservation partnerships are possible within the next 5 years. And that would involve at least 1,750 private landowners partnerships. There are partnerships with just under 1,000 private landowners at the moment with the Land for Wildlife program, but that is chronically underfunded and needs a big boost in terms of resources and capacity. But we also need to be having partnerships with pastoral leases and pastoral leaseholders, Aboriginal groups, of course, who can provide Aboriginal ranger services and management, and of course, mining companies and other businesses that can help fund these partnerships and participate in them because they've got skin in the game and partnerships and a presence on country as well. So this is a new approach to conservation to be done through partnerships with the different parts of our community in ways that will improve farm productivity, will deliver social benefits, it helps tackle climate change, and of course it provides jobs for our regions. We're also targeting at least 1% of our gross state product to be invested in conservation. This is a new target that we're releasing today, and we know that conservation has been chronically underfunded in WA for decades. Western Australia, we have 2.64 million square kilometres and a gross state product of around $260 billion. And if we just spent 1% of that gross state product on conservation and land management and restoration, we'd see 2.6 billion spent on conservation annually. That works out to around $10 per hectare averaged across the state. And even so, I mean, it's been hard to find real hard data on this, but we think that would deliver at least a 2 to 3-fold increase in current conservation spending, because our estimates are that it's only about 1/3 of 1% of our gross state product that's currently invested in conservation initiatives. So this is a goal to really boost that in a big way and triple the amount of resources and funding that's going into land management and conservation across the state. Another goal that we're setting is a zero loss of habitat for endangered wildlife. And we know that WA is a global hotspot for biodiversity. And most of our plants and animals that we have here are found nowhere else on Earth. But our wildlife really is in serious trouble, and many species are close to extinction, and that list of threatened and endangered species is growing every year. Habitat is a word that we give. It's a simple word that we give to the homes and also the food that our wildlife need to survive. But so much of our habitat in WA has been lost or degraded, and what we have left, it absolutely must be protected. But we've still got habitat loss occurring through land clearing, fire, logging, weeds, pests, and loss of habitat is the biggest threat to our endangered species. And it's also an animal welfare disaster because our wildlife really suffer from the loss of that habitat. So achieving zero loss of habitat for endangered wildlife, we think is critical to halting the further decline. And that's a goal that we should be aspiring to for Western Australia as soon as possible. We also think that it's possible and achievable to get 10 million hectares of revegetation and carbon farming across our state by 2025. And this is an ambitious goal, again, to restore land that's degraded and to help return wildlife and also cut pollution. It brings jobs and it creates habitat for wildlife. So we think that 10 million hectares of revegetation and carbon farming can be achieved within 5 years. There's already carbon farming projects now going ahead in our pastoral leases. But we think that there's 4 million hectares of revegetation and carbon plantings that is possible on degraded and salt-affected farmland in the southwest. There's another 3.5 million hectares of pastoral leases that can be managed to allow regrowth of native vegetation. We can protect 1.5 million hectares of forests and other native vegetation that would otherwise be at risk of logging and clearing. And of course, there's the opportunity for savanna burning programs in the Kimberley, where Aboriginal rangers can be employed, which is also a form of carbon farming that's being used in the north. So there's real opportunities here. And again, it's an opportunity to create jobs and also address some really serious environmental challenges that our regions and our country is facing. In the southwest, there's a huge opportunity to create 1 million hectares of protected forest areas for nature and for climate and for communities by 2025. And Jess is going to talk a little bit about the Forest for Life campaign and what the WA Forest Alliance is working on. But just quickly, forest protection in the southwest now represents a huge opportunity for investment and job creation in that region. But logging operations are currently destroying 10 football fields of native forest every day. That's a pretty alarming statistic. Protecting forests means protecting homes and habitat for native wildlife. It means creating new jobs in a growing sustainable economy. It means completing the transition of the state's timber industry to plantation forestry. It means supporting sustainable forest businesses like tourism and carbon farming and honey production. And it means up to 10 million tonnes of carbon pollution can be removed from the atmosphere every year by protecting forests and keeping trees standing and living and sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere rather than cutting them down. So that's our key goals that we're launching today. We know they're ambitious and we know that they can't just be achieved by government, but we're appealing to all sectors to contribute towards achieving those goals. We also have set out a lot of different more specific policy asks in the document that we've released for governments. And you know, a lot of those things will be things that are familiar to you. You will have seen a lot of them before, but there'll also be some new things in there as well. So we encourage you to download those documents and have a look through. You'll see most of the priorities that our member groups have been campaigning for across the state are reflected in there. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the polling results that we've been getting just recently. And it's really overwhelming that Western Australians want stronger action on climate change in particular, but all conservation issues. And it's actually a vote changer. People are saying that they're willing to change their vote for a party that has strong policies on these issues. So just some quick headlines there, and Mel will tell me when we're running out of time, but 85% of Western Australians support stronger action on climate change. Only 4% are in that group that might be called climate skeptics who oppose action. Over 60% believe the McGowan government should be doing more. 77% believe it's unacceptable for WA's carbon pollution to keep rising. And actually, the number 50% would be more likely to vote for a party with strong climate policies. That's a pretty big number of people that could potentially change their vote, because we know that elections are won on pretty small swings. It only takes a few percent of people in marginal seats to change their vote, and it changes the whole outcome for governments and for the elections. So to have 50% of people saying they're more likely to vote for a party with strong climate policies is really a very strong endorsement, and shows that there's an opportunity for all political parties to win votes by having strong policies on this. West Australians believe climate action will bring more jobs and a stronger economy. The old myth of climate action and reducing emissions killing jobs is not cutting through anymore. Only 12% of people actually think that action on climate change will harm the economy. The overwhelming majority know that it'll bring new industries and create more jobs and broaden the economy. There's really strong support for expanding national parks and funding conservation programs. The McGowan government's Plan for Our Parks is one of its most popular initiatives that polls really strongly. And 70% believe that new national parks and marine parks are good for jobs and the economy. And 82% support more government funding for conservation jobs. West Australians want to see an end to native forest logging. Really strong numbers there, with 78% believing that native forests logging should be phased out and timber sourced from sustainable plantations. And the same number believing that all remaining native forests should be protected to provide homes for wildlife and maintain a healthy environment. There's also really strong support for protecting Aboriginal heritage, and this is probably partly a result of the recent exposure of the destruction of the Juukan Gorge and the mining industry just getting away with terrible crimes against Aboriginal heritage. 74% of people believe that consent should be required from traditional owners before Aboriginal heritage can be impacted. And interestingly, Western Australians think that the sun is setting on the gas industry, and they don't want to see it continuing to expand. In fact, Western Australians support phasing out gas and the fossil fuel industry in Western Australia. 80% think the state should require the big polluters to offset their emissions through tree planting and carbon farming. And 64% believe that WA should be phasing out gas and replacing it with renewable energy. A majority support a ban on new gas developments. And investing in gas, the gas-led recovery that we're hearing from the Morrison government is actually the least preferred option for economic recovery among West Australians. So yeah, there's some snapshots of the polling and a quick run through of our goals that we've set in terms of the platform that we're putting forward today for all political parties. Of course, we've been talking to and lobbying all political parties for a long time on these kinds of initiatives, but this is the first time that we're presenting them in this way. So we're really looking forward to the community and Conservation Council supporters getting behind these initiatives and promoting them to your local MPs and demonstrating that there's really strong support for these kinds of initiatives across all voter groups. This is conservation and climate action is not an issue now for just one part of the community. This is something that we all need to be sharing in, and that's the reason why we've presented it in a way that actually provides benefits across all parts of our community, whilst also addressing those critical environmental and climate change issues that we're facing. So that's it from me. Hopefully I haven't exceeded my time, and I'll throw back to Melissa, and then we can have some discussion and questions later on when we have the chat.
Thanks, Pierce. You actually did great. You were 4 minutes under.
That'll be a first. Great.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, good job. Great. Well, thank you so much, Pierce. I did see a couple of questions come in on the chat. Not too many though, so I think we'll push on and then we'll get to some of those questions at the end. The next person that we'll be hearing from is Jess Beckerling from the WA Forest Alliance. I'm sure this is another person who doesn't need an introduction, but just for those of you who aren't aware, Jess has lived in the forests on the South Coast for the past 13 years. She first became involved in forest conservation in 1997 when she joined the, I hope I pronounced this right, the Giblet Forest Blockade near Pemberton. Jess lived in forest blockade camps for 3 years, winning the state government's Youth Leadership Award in recognition of her commitment to the maintenance of nonviolence. Oh, just making sure I was off mute. I had a crisis there for a second that I was on mute. Sorry, so she won the state government's Youth Leadership Award in recognition of her commitment to the maintenance of nonviolence in the camps. As well as forest conservation, Jess has played an important role in local conservation issues around Denmark and Walpole. She has been the convener of WAFA since 2011 and was awarded the Conservation Council's biggest award in 2015 for her commitment over many years to the protection of the environment. So I'll hand it over to you, Jess. Thanks again for being with us. And if you could just be sure to record yourself on your phone as well for the podcast, that'd be great. And I will give you a gentle 5-minute warning if we do come close to time.
Oh, thank you so much, Melissa. That's a much longer bio than the one I sent through. Very generous intro, thanks very much. And I also just want to say congratulations to Piers and Cons Council and the whole Clean State team for that presentation. I know it takes an enormous amount of work to get to such clear and succinct and also, like you said, ambitious goals, but I can see someone in the chat saying that it's if not now then when, because obviously we need to be this ambitious now. So congratulations to you and the rest of the team. So I want to acknowledge I'm calling in from Menang Noongar country on the south coast, and acknowledge that I'm on Aboriginal country. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And like Melissa said, I'm the convener of the WA Forest Alliance and campaign director. I've been doing this work for a very long time. WA Forest Alliance is at full tilt in the lead up to the state election in just 4 weeks' time. And like others, and like Piers said, and others here would agree, I'm sure, we're also conscious of the fact that this is a very unusual election. We've had a pretty odd year, to say the least, and it's been very challenging for a lot of people. And it does make sense that people are particularly concerned about COVID and their personal and community security as we get closer to the state election, as they have been over the past 12 months or so. But like Piers and Cons Council is saying, we're also hearing loud and clear in the work that we're doing on the street, in the key electorates that we're working in, 6 of them in the metro area and then across the southwest, and through all the digital and phone-based campaigning that we're doing, that the people are no less concerned about the environment now than they were 4 years ago or 10 years ago. In fact, over the past 18 months, as Piers said, there's been a significant increase in the proportion of people in WA who want to see the full protection of the southwest forest. Has gone from 68% to 78% in the past 18 months. So we're working to ensure that forest protection is firmly on the agenda, and that it's resoundingly clear that regardless of other circumstances, the environment remains a top priority, because in reality, as I'm sure you're all aware, forest protection has only become more urgent. I just want to quickly show you 3 maps. So hopefully this is nice and quick. Everybody see those maps? I'll just move this out of the way. So this shows you the global biodiversity hotspot that we're here in the southwest of Western Australia. And Piers mentioned this before. There's 36 global biodiversity hotspots in the southwest of Western Australia, in the world, and southwest of Western Australia is one of them. In order to qualify as a global biodiversity hotspot, you have to have an incredibly high degree of diversity of life, but you also need to have lost or severely degraded at least 70% of the natural vegetation in the area. By 1990, we had lost or severely degraded 90% of the original vegetation in the southwest. So here you're looking at the forest and woodland cover in this region in 1829. The next map shows what it is like today in 2020. I'll show you that change again very quickly. So you can see that we've lost an extraordinary amount of the forest and woodland cover in the southwest, and today nearly 50%, it's about 45% of what remains in the forest is still outside of conservation. So this is an issue of global concern. There's actually been more land cover, vegetation cover lost here than has been lost for all of the palm oil plantations on Earth. And you can imagine that for the Carnaby's cockatoos, for example, and for the numbats, who were using this whole integrated set of ecosystems in the forest and the woodlands that have now been confined very much to this strip along the southwest, that the impacts on wildlife and then of course on biodiversity have been very severe. So in that context, in the lead up to this election, our top requests as we approach the election are that all parties commit to 3 major things: that they immediately protect the most high conservation value forests from logging and clearing, that they complete the transition of the timber industry to plantations and farm forestry, and that they make the next 10-year forest management plan, which is fast approaching, a forest conservation plan and not a forest logging plan. And similarly to what Piers was talking about, doing this offers a whole host of opportunities to WA. It's obviously essential to wildlife because, as we know, endangered species like the black cockatoos and the quokkas, western ring-tailed possums, continue to lose homes and nesting sites and food at a rate of 10 football fields every single day. And not only would protecting these forests be critical for wildlife and biodiversity, but also by stopping the logging, we can prevent up to 60 million tonnes of carbon being emitted over a decade. And so that 60 million tonnes over a decade is the equivalent of taking 1.2 million cars off the road. So it's no small benefit. And some of you might have seen the IUCN recently said that protecting forests offers us 1/3 of all of the global climate mitigation efforts that we need. So we simply cannot forget forests when we're talking about the desperate need that we have now to be removing carbon from the atmosphere. And also every time we're logging and clearing those forests, we're putting further carbon emissions into the atmosphere. And it would also support all those sectors in the southwest that rely on forests, including tourism, honey production, agriculture, recreation, and others. And I think when you hear that 1 tonne of Jarrah honey sells for $30,000 a tonne, and 1 tonne of Jarrah firewood sells for at best $300. And of course, you get to keep the Jarrah forest intact after you've been allowing for those sustainable industries to be able to operate in them. It really is a no-brainer. So finally, I want to turn quickly to what people can do to get involved and what we're up to in the next 4.5 weeks or so, and then beyond into the development of the forest management plan. We're just this week launching our ad campaign on Catch Up TV and social media and some billboards in the CBD in the southwest, which is very exciting. They're really very powerful ads that are designed to reach a new audience, and they call on the Premier to protect the southwest forests. We're continuing to advocate the Forest for Life plan that Piers mentioned quickly. That's a plan that would create a minimum of 1,000 jobs in the timber industry and grow 40,000 hectares of high value hardwood trees in association with cropping and grazing. It would also have all sorts of other co-benefits for salinity and water quality. It's a really exciting plan that if anybody's interested in finding out more about, you can have a look on the WAFER website or the Forest for Life website. And we're also at full tilt in 7 electorates, so it's far too much to list here. But if anybody's interested in any work at all to support the forest campaign, whether it's phone banking or letterboxing or meeting with your MPs, running events, helping out at various events and stalls that we're putting on, then you can join in the campaign team on our website. We've also got heaps of screenings of the Cry of the Forest still coming up, and you can find them on the website as well. Incredibly powerful film that I encourage you to go along to a screening if you haven't seen it yet. And of course, we're working with lots of community groups and business groups to raise the profile of the issues and expose what's happening in the forest. You might have seen some of the incredible work that the Nanas for Native Forests are doing, and we're supporting them the best that we can. And every day we're welcoming new people into the campaign. So there's a spot for everybody. And if you're interested in getting involved, then please do get in touch. I can see a question from Sue, Mel, so if I've got another 30 seconds, can I answer that? The electorates are in the metro area. They're Freo and Bicton, Kalamunda, Darling Range, Mount Lawley and Maylands. And then the whole southwest is our upper house area. So I'll leave it there. I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody else. And thanks so much, Melissa, for putting this together, and to Cons Council for hosting it. It's an important event, and I'm grateful to be here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jess. Yeah, amazing work, very inspiring. Always love hearing you speak. I'm seeing some questions come through. Let's save them. I am getting them, as I said at the beginning of the event, put onto a separate sheet so that we can ask them at the end and have a bit of a discussion with all of our speakers. We're now going to hear from Martin from Environs Kimberley. And just to tell you a little bit more about Martin, he comes from a rural Welsh background and has an extensive experience in agriculture gained in England, Wales, New Zealand, and Australia. He holds a higher national diploma and Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, a postgraduate diploma in policy studies, specializing in ecologically sustainable development from Murdoch University. Martin has worked in catchment management in the southwest of Western Australia, chaired a number of environmental non-governmental organizations, and has been a member of the various ministerial appointed boards. And Martin has been in his position as Director of EK since 2008. Martin, are you ready to speak with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for that, those presentations, Piers and Jess. It's always good to hear that. And yeah, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners that we work with across the Kimberley. We work with about 10 different Aboriginal groups. And yeah, it's a privilege to be able to do that. So I'm going to primarily talk about two headline issues that we've got for the election. We've got a number of others, but there's not going to be time to talk about everything. So I'm just going to share a presentation with you. Let's get it up now. And can you see that okay? Yep, cool. Yeah, so as most of you would be aware, the Kimberley is one of the very special places on the planet that hasn't been industrialized or turned into agricultural monocrops. And it is actually an area of the most intact tropical savanna on the planet. And it's also got the most, it's in the top 4% of the most intact coastlines on the planet. And those two stats are from scientists who've done work studying the globe essentially, and reinforcing how special the Kimberley is. And that's Dangu there. That's the Fitzroy River, with the Margaret River coming in through the back there. Both very special places. And that land on the left there is currently leased by Gina Reinhardt, just for your interest. Just to talk about the election, we are working very hard to protect the Fitzroy, and we're working in partnership with the Kimberley Like Nowhere Else team down in Perth there, supported by Pew, and we're working with also the traditional owners like the Kimberley Land Council, the Marawara Fitzroy River Council, as well as other traditional owners across the catchment. And the Fitzroy is one of the largest, last free-flowing rivers in Northern Australia. It's also got quite a big catchment, which is 1.5 times Tasmania. Its cultural and natural values are internationally significant, and that's well documented. It is the largest registered Aboriginal heritage site in Western Australia, and the floodplains along the Fitzroy meet Ramsar listing criteria, so they're internationally significant wetlands, but they haven't been listed as yet. Gina Reinhardt's opposed to that. And also the river was National Heritage listed in 2011, so that gives you the picture that it is a very special river. And And I guess that's again Dangu, a very special place for the Bonabar people, and that's currently underwater. So yeah, the significance of this place is, goes back into deep time. That's a 350 million year old reef that's sticking out of the ground there, and yeah, it's got global significant World Heritage values, we believe. Just in terms of the McGowan government, both in their party platform and in their election promise, in their plan for the Kimberley in 2017, they committed to essentially three things for the Fitzroy. One was to have a national park along the Fitzroy from Fitzroy crossing north towards Mornington Station and along the Margaret River as well. Then they also committed to no dams. Environs Kimberley was set up 25 years ago to stop damming of the Fitzroy, and finally we have a government that's agreed with us and agreed with the traditional owners in the Fitzroy Valley that there shall not be dams on the Fitzroy. And then this is a really important one. This is the tricky one, where they have said that they'd support the protection and development of a management plan for the Fitzroy, and this is where the debate is currently at the moment. And what the government's doing is putting out a consultation paper on the Fitzroy, and what they've done is the end of that consultation is the end of May. So effectively, they've neutralised or tried to neutralise the Fitzroy as something that's going to be important during the election campaign here in Kimberley. And obviously, what we're trying to do is make sure that people are aware of it and that they vote, according to who's got the strongest policies on the Fitzroy. And one of the problems we've got is that Gina Reinhardt, one of the wealthiest women in Australia, of course, on the world, wants to take 325 billion litres of water out of the Fitzroy River every year. And that's more than the whole 2 million people who live in Perth and the southwest use every year. So obviously our concerns are around the detrimental impacts that would have on the river, including threatening the critically endangered freshwater sawfish, as well as the barramundi and other species that are important for people there. And obviously as well, it's an incredibly important cultural site for the traditional owners. And so this is what we're facing really, is that Labour has yet to commit to protecting the river. And there's also another station there, that's Go-Go Station, which is on the Margaret River. That's the Harris family from New South Wales, some of whom have been taking water illegally in New South Wales. And they also want to put 8,000 hectares in and take 50 billion litres of water. So really that's what we're up against, and what we're asking is that Labour protects the river, and this is how we're asking them to do it, and that's by putting a buffer zone in that would protect the Fitzroy and ensure that there wouldn't be any mining, fracking, irrigation or pumping out of surface water. And I guess what we're seeing is that the election, as it is, we know that McGowan's government is going to get back in, and probably going to have the control of the upper house as well. So what we're seeing this election is a continuum really, because after the election we're going to need to still continue to campaign strongly. And at the moment what we're doing is asking people to sign our petition to McGowan, and you can go to our website for that. The other issue that we're working on is trying to stop fracking, and currently this is the map of what the petroleum leases look like in the Kimberley, those bits in yellow where it is possible to frack. That's Broome there, Fitzroy Crossing here, just to give you, that's 4.5 hour drive, so it's quite a large area. And just to give you an idea of how much gas there is, you can see there at the bottom the Canning Basin gas. It's estimated to be 8 times more gas than what's in the Browse Basin. That and Woodside obviously wants a small chunk of that. So it's a significant amount of gas. And what that would mean would be, if it was fully exploited, then it would double Australia's Paris Agreement carbon budget. It would be absolutely massive, a huge carbon bomb. And aside from the potential for all those chemicals to pollute the Kimberley's waterways and groundwater and turn the landscape into an industrial landscape and threatening tourism, this is a major issue that we're calling on the state government to basically to ban fracking. They're not going to do it for this election, but over time we're going to have to continue to fight until we win, essentially. And at the moment we have got a fracking proposal in front of the EPA. They want it's Texan frackers that have just moved in, and we've also got Origin Energy who've moved in to the Kimberley, and they are absolutely massive, several times bigger than Woodside. And we know that they want to frack the Kimberley as well, which would be an absolute disaster. So, we're also continuing to, we're going to have to continue to fight for this after the election. And we just want to put pressure on Labour to push them to get to a point where they do ban this in the future. So again, we're asking people to get involved in the campaign that's going to be ongoing, and signing the petition, etc., to the government. I haven't been keeping track of time, Melissa. How long have I got?
You've got maybe another 5 minutes.
Another 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a few other things that I haven't really gone into. They're the top line issues that we're talking to Labour about. We're talking to all the candidates here in the Kimberley, and obviously, letting people know and asking people to write to the candidates and the parties about these issues, and making sure that they are live issues for the election, and trying to get it out there into the media to put the pressure on. But there are other things that we're also asking for, which are not such. We're not running public campaigns on them, but they are nonetheless really important. And one of them is the Mitchell Plateau and the proposed bauxite mining that was there years ago. McGowan himself in 2013 said that it should be a conservation park, and there should never be bauxite mining there. And that still hasn't happened. It hasn't come to fruition that Mitchell Plateau has been protected. So we're pushing them on that. We do want to see an increase in the ranger program. At the moment, there's $20 million that goes to the Aboriginal Ranger program across Western Australia. We want to see that significantly increase because it's so important for not only protecting the environment, but for providing work, and has fantastic social outcomes. And also, it's really important for Aboriginal culture as well. The other thing that we want to do is finally get marine parks along the entire coast. So at the moment, we've got a couple of gaps. The government's working on the Buccaneer Archipelago, which will give us about 80% of the coast. That's gone up from 0 in 2008. So 80% of the Kimberley coast going to be in marine parks, and we want that last 20%. And it looks like that will be a future commitment, but not for this election. The other thing is that we've only got 7% of the Kimberley in protected areas, which is woefully inadequate. So we're keen to see more protected areas. And also land clearing. At the moment, we're aware of 80,000 hectares that are being proposed for clearing. And obviously that's a really significant threat to the internationally significant biodiversity here. And then another thing that we've got is the horizontal falls, where there was previously a copper mine proposed there. The Barnett government stopped that, but it's still yet to be in a protected area to be protected from copper mining. So they're a few of the other issues that we're engaging with government on. But so the two main issues that you'll see in the media are fracking and the Fitzroy. So I think I'll leave it there. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to all of you. And thanks to the Cons Council for organising this. It's a really important, informative event. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
Great, thanks, Martin. I see some great questions coming in on the chat. So we'll have a chance to hear more from Martin in just a little bit. We'll move on now to our next speaker, who is coming from the Wilderness Society, Pat Gardner, who's the WA campaigns manager for the Wilderness Society. Patrick has also worked in the public sector in agencies to develop and implement strategy. The Wilderness Society is seeking commitments from candidates at the state election to protect native vegetation, restore our degraded landscapes, and end native forest logging. Patrick, I'll hand it over to you.
Wonderful, thanks, Melissa. Coming to you from the Whadjuk lands of the Noongar Nation. Also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Similar to previous speakers, just would like to acknowledge the work that Piers, Melissa, Maggie, Stephanie have put into this evening. I know a lot of planning goes into these types of events, particularly the shuffling around as a result of last week's lockdown. So thanks again for connecting everyone, importantly, well in advance of the ballots going out. I'll share my screen in keeping with this evening. Hopefully that will come up. So the Wilderness Society is pursuing a broad tranche. Just let me bring that up. There we go. Three primary elements to our election asks that we're seeking from political parties and candidates across the spectrum. In no particular order, we want to see a net gain to our statewide native vegetation, a significant funding contribution towards land restoration programs in the order of $100 million or more, and an end to native forest logging. I'll go through each of those in that order and hopefully give Melissa a little bit of time back at the end, because I realise the questions are starting to come through thick and fast. So I am mindful that we obviously want to ensure that everyone has the ability to throw those into the Zoom room. So the first component that I talked about was a net gain to our statewide native vegetation. We're recognising the critical role that forest, bushland, low-lying vegetation, so everything from the tall stuff through to the small stuff, the role that plays, in combating climate change as a store for carbon, and protecting against some of the more extreme weather patterns that we've seen recently, and also just as importantly the protection to our threatened species that depend on that native vegetation for habitat, food sources, etc. What we want to push for through that net gain is an acknowledgement that we are losing huge swathes of our native vegetation across the state in individual bioregions for a variety of different reasons. But nevertheless, there's a constant reduction in rates of native vegetation due to development, which obviously is going as quickly as any period in WA's history at the moment, but industrial and commercial development predominantly, but also some residential development through the southwest in particular. The impacts of climate change are obviously going to have a significant impact on those rates of native vegetation. Bushfires are obviously a pertinent reminder of the impacts that native vegetation is going to face, regardless of where it is in the state. So we want to see, and I'll go into this in a little bit, the acknowledgement of that net gain being a really important plank of native vegetation management, but also a way in which we can ensure that there's appropriate and sufficient restoration efforts that actually provide a bit of a buttress against that continued decline in our stocks of native vegetation. With that in mind, the Wilderness Society and a number of organisations have been somewhat frustrated, to put it mildly, about the pace of a review into the native vegetation management system that was initiated by the state government several years ago, it's still in a bit of a holding pattern. And as a result, we have been continuing to undertake our research, engage with members and supporters, and put together a series of suitable recommendations that we'll probably be putting into the public domain in the lead up to the election. We'll also use that when the draft and final versions of that native vegetation policy come out. But predominantly that focuses on the importance of placing data and monitoring at the forefront of any management system. We're seeing the benefits of the utilisation of technology in areas like healthcare at the moment. And we certainly acknowledge that that's going to play a huge role in environmental policy around monitoring and enforcement of illegal clearing, but also ensuring that there's a much more strategic and technologically enabled approach to manage those stocks across the state. As I said, we want to pursue that net gain in native vegetation, just as an aspirational target for the government to pursue and to encourage the appropriate levels of restoration and revegetation. As I've hinted at, and I'll go into in a little further detail, that significant increase to land restoration programs, and also the ability, in line with the recent EPBC review, the ability to enshrine far greater third-party rights, transparency and enforcement, to ensure that we are doing the right thing by those protected species across the state. Second plank that the Wilderness Society will be pursuing, and we've been encouraged that a number of parties and spokespersons for the environment have recognised this is going to be a really important part of any policy platform going forward, is land restoration. And with that in mind, we want to go to the state government, whoever that is, come the 14th of March, and be pushing the case that there really needs to be much more than just pilot funding, or pardon the pun, seed funding, to those land restoration programs. So something in the order of $100 million. We have had the ability as an organisation to push for similar significant increases in investment to programs in other jurisdictions in Australia. We've sort of been through the process with the Queensland government, where they now have a $500 million land restoration fund that is pursuing some really innovative funding rounds and ensuring that they're doing the appropriate thing to push back on those rates of deforestation in their state, and that's certainly needed in WA. We recognise there's a number of really clear benefits in relation to land restoration beyond just the obvious environmental outcomes, including the promotion of employment within the regions and of First Nations people across the state. That goes alongside the obvious mitigation that land restoration can play in combating climate change and ensuring there's the appropriate levels of biodiversity outcomes when we go and pursue those types of programs. Jurisdictions, as I said, around Australia are starting to recognise that's going to be an important and critical part of their environmental platform going forward. There's a number of principles that we've been able to discuss with political parties and candidates over the past couple of months, and we're seeing an acknowledgement that they recognise the rationale behind those principles around that sufficient funding commitment beyond just a proof of concept or a pilot program. We know this works and can be taken at scale really quickly. You obviously need the appropriate experts to guide methodology and the prioritisation of that investment, but that's a really broad remit of advisors and experts that can guide that program from certainly the agricultural sector, environmental and conservation sectors, the bureaucracy itself, First Nations Australians. We also want to ensure that we incentivise the right behaviours. So there's no point pursuing massive amounts of land restoration funding and going ahead with projects that are completely inappropriate for particular bioregions within the state. So the replanting of eastern states eucalypts or something that isn't going to have that broader benefit to either carbon outcomes or biodiversity outcomes. And obviously, as I've talked about through the last couple of minutes, recognising the co-benefits that a program like land restoration can have if it's pursued at scale. As I said, we've been encouraged by the announcements to date from a number of parties in relation to putting far more than what is currently on the table from the state government. And we would anticipate that there is a little bit of brinksmanship, if I can say that, that will encourage those further commitments. Finally, and I certainly am not looking to steal any of Jess or Wafer's thunder here. Naturally, we want to see an end to native forest logging. There's a broad misconception that WA, by and large, has lived with since 2001, that we've solved our old growth forest issue. It's permeated across to the eastern states in a lot of ways. But we know that is really a legislative dodge in relation to the way in which old growth forest is recognised under law and the practices that FPC and the like commit to. So we see it absolutely critical that next forest management plan transition away from native forest logging and into other sources for our timber products. We need to recognise there as well that there's some tricky issues that need to be pursued through the election process, but also beyond, particularly in relation to those jarrah forests that Jess mentioned earlier. I know there's a number of individuals on the call this evening from the locales of Dwelling Up and Serpentine, Jarrahdale, and naturally they've got very valid concerns and frustrations with the continued rates of bauxite mining and what is proposed through that area. So that's certainly one that we're looking to pursue and make a few decision makers very uncomfortable going forward. In keeping with the theme of the last couple of weeks, I thought it would be remiss of me not to just flash up a quick QR code that I'm sure you're all very diligently using, just linking to our Facebook page as an appropriate landing spot for just our future announcements in this space. And by all means, use that as an opportunity to get in touch, let us know your opinions, and connect with us, both in the lead up to the election, but well and truly beyond that, because there's a number of issues that have been raised, not just by the Wilderness Society, but by every group this evening that are going to require long-term efforts to ensure that the appropriate reforms are pursued. How'd it go, Melissa? Have I hit 10 minutes yet? Good.
Yeah, on the nose, actually.
There we go.
Well done. Right. We're doing really well for time. For those of you who are not new to CCWA events, you'll know that that's a bit of an ongoing challenge for us, but we're doing great. Pat, thank you so much. And we'll definitely, I can pop the link to your Facebook chat, to your Facebook page in the chat while the next person is going, for those of us who aren't familiar with QR codes as of yet. So moving right along, we're going to hear from Paul Gamblin from Protect Ningaloo, which is a really, really inspiring campaign. Paul is the director of Protect Ningaloo, which is a joint initiative hosted by the Australian Marine Conservation Society with CCWA and Cape Conservation Group in Exmouth. Prior to this, Paul worked for WWF International, based in Switzerland and Australia, and was the architect of its Global Ocean Campaign. Paul was previously with WWF Australia in various roles, including as director of its WA program. In the early 2000s, Paul was spokesperson and advocate for the joint campaign hosted by CCWA to stop unsustainable development and advance conservation measures at Ningaloo Reef, which I have to say is one of the most stunning places I've ever been. Paul, I will pass over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to the Cons Council for this event. Conscious, fantastic presentations, conscious that there are quite a few of them. So I don't have a huge amount to say, and I'm really prepared to give a minute of my session for everyone to have a bit of a stretch, bit of a move around. We've got some great conversations to have, I think, and a Q&A session too. And I just think, having had the privilege of working internationally, just to hear again of the values of Western Australia, what an extraordinary state we live in, from the temperate cool forests and the south coast right up to the Kimberley. There is nowhere else like it on the planet. And there are so many threats that this incredible nature and the cultural values that we have are facing. But still, it's a wondrous place and a great reminder of that. So I'll be talking about a bit of the country in between the south and the north around Ningaloo and Exmouth Gulf. And I'd like to acknowledge the Yunikatura, Bayungu and Talanji people whose country I'll be talking about tonight. And I think the global context is a really important one to situate the work that we're trying to do around Ningaloo and Exmouth Gulf. Globally, we know the UN and many other respected institutions have made clear that the planet is facing a biodiversity crisis as well as a climate crisis, of course. And we know that we aren't getting our act together nationally either, or at the state level in terms of adequately protecting biodiversity, and particularly protecting critical habitat and the places that a whole range of threatened species rely on, the last footholds for many species. And that's why the conservation sector is really focused on Exmouth Gulf. It's a really rare and special place globally, nationally, and in Western Australia. It is that provides critical habitat for a whole range of incredible species, from swordfish to whales and dolphins and dugongs and turtles. That it has extensive mangroves and seagrasses and corals, and so many of these values are threatened in so much of the world. But they're actually doing okay, relatively speaking, in Exmouth Gulf, and so it's really important that we get ahead of the game. And Exmouth Gulf is also really important for Ningaloo Reef. It's all one system ultimately, and the Gulf provides very important nursery functions for Ningaloo Reef, and is also very important in its own right. But unfortunately, it's also facing significant threats from industrialization, and the area is really at a crossroads. It's a critical time for action. And so last year, some of you may be aware that with strong community support, we were able to persuade Subsea 7, a global multinational oil and gas services company, from building a very large pipeline, oil and gas pipeline fabrication facility in Exmouth Gulf. And we were also able to stop working with other conservation groups, major new areas of oil and gas being opened up off Ningaloo and Shark Bay. And it feels like a relentless series of industrial and heavy development being proposed for this area, like the Pilbara is moving down into this area. We also, despite the fact that we've made good progress over the last year or so, we're facing more threats from more developments. There's an industrial port proposal for an area about 10 kilometres south of Exmouth town site, in an area which is really intact and beautiful and really biodiverse. And there's also a multinational company that wants to build a salt production facility across the Gulf on the other side, south of Onslow, but also in the northern part of Exmouth Gulf, in a really beautiful and intact area. So we are calling on the government, the next government, to take action and draw a line in the sand and stop the threat of industrialization. And essentially, the next term of government presents the opportunity to set Exmouth Gulf on a trajectory where its world-class, unique natural and social values are celebrated, not threatened, where its outstanding nature-based tourism, research, education, and joint management potential is secured, not undermined. We need to see an end to the threat of industrialization. We need certainty, we need security for the environment and for the jobs that rely on it. And we also believe that this area should be an inspiration for smart management, for sustainability, and not a place that should face ongoing uncertainty. So it's a time to draw a line in the sand for nature, for people, for jobs, and for a healthy future. Thanks.
Fabulous, thanks, Paul. Great. I was going to ask Piers, we've come to the end of our speakers. Is there anything that you might like to say to sort of tie things up, or maybe bring us back to the original presentation, kind of a summary, putting you on the spot?
Thank you. Thank those people who've presented, and you get a sense of the diversity of issues across the state that Conservation Council member groups are working away at. Of course, there's the Clean State campaign as well, which we haven't really talked about much this evening, but certainly there's lots of ways that you can participate and get involved in Clean State. That is working with communities in various different metro electorates as well to get action on climate change onto the agenda. But yeah, I just it's great to have everyone here, and I think we just should move into discussion with Q&A, and maybe someone can pop the link up to the document that we have launched today with those policy goals, because there really is a lot of other content that sits behind that, a lot of the kind of policy areas that will be familiar to you certainly feature in there, the old familiar tunes that we need to keep playing, things like banning fracking across the state and banning uranium and updating our wildlife protection laws and a whole range of different policy asks of government, and also some new ones like phasing out fossil fuel exports and replacing them with renewable energy. So we really commend that to you. We couldn't go through that all this evening. It was too much detail, but I have hopefully given you an overview of the those goals that we're setting, the challenges that we're setting for the state. And yeah, I think if we just go to Q&A, no doubt there's lots of questions coming in, so happy to try and answer some of them.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pierce. So my colleague Guy has just popped the Vision 2021 document into the chat for anybody who's interested in seeing that. We do have some questions to get through, Pierce. The first one came in during your presentation. It came from Annie Hill asking what the current thinking is on Andrew Forrest's green hydrogen.
It's a good question, and it's a very interesting situation with Andrew Forrest actually lecturing the state through the Boyer lectures and the country about the need to take action on climate change and how it's going to be very profitable to do that. I think it really shows that we're in a real period of change and turning point, and things are happening very quickly. I think there's going to be some announcements tomorrow from a political party that you might not expect, which is actually going to be really positive around renewable energy and moving away from fossil fuels. So look, I think there is a shift occurring. There's obviously still pushback from some places politically, but I think here in WA we've got an opportunity to actually sidestep that. And I think people are, you know, partly hopefully because of the Clean State campaign and other initiatives, people are starting to realise that action on climate change and renewable energy could be a great future for us, both economically and environmentally. I will just say though that Andrew Forrest and the FMG mining company have just been given approval to build a large gas-fired power station to power their mining operations. And we hope they don't go ahead and do that, but they have been given approval for that. The approval requires them to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, which is good. It's better than what we've seen before from these kinds of approvals. But in the meantime, that project will release a lot of carbon pollution, and I think about 9.7 million tonnes over its lifetime, which will just add to our existing carbon burden that we're already putting into the atmosphere. So yeah, I think that may be a little bit hypocritical of Andrew Forrest to be promoting renewable energy and also trying to build gas-fired power stations. We'll keep working on that. Many people made submissions and raised concerns about it. We'll keep working away at that to try and stop not just that one, but other gas projects from going ahead in WA. But yeah, I think we're at a really interesting point in history where a little bit of pressure from the community can actually tip these things over the edge and get us a much better outcome.
Great, thanks, Pierce. I've got a kind of general question next. Any of the speakers can feel free to weigh in on this. Someone was asking about the benefit of having psychologists or mental health professionals in our various networks. that are there to assess the damage being done to people's mental health because of climate destruction, which, as we know, mental health is increasingly recognized as a priority issue in the climate crisis. Do any of the speakers want to make a comment about that, either how you're looking out for mental health or plans to do so?
I think that's a big conversation. It's maybe not so much an election one, but certainly those of us who pay attention to the state of our environment and climate, yeah, it's very challenging at times to maintain a positive outlook. But I think it's really important that we do and find ways of having hope so that we can continue doing the kind of work that needs to be done to get the solutions underway. But yeah, it's a big issue, and certainly we need to see support for mental health services from government as well, but also individuals, yeah, taking care, and that's part of what we've been putting forward with Cleanstate and Conservation Council as well, is talking about the solutions, talking about the other benefits that these solutions can provide, and trying to stay positive about these things.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pierce. Jess, I saw you put your hand up.
Yeah, my daughter's 14 and was involved in one of the climate strikes last year, and it was really clear to me, looking at the peers that she had around her as they were organising that's something that's really real for younger people. And I think that's something that really, one of the things that really motivates me is that I think that as older people in the climate movement, you know, even if we're just in our 30s and 40s and 50s, we really have a responsibility to be showing those younger generations that we haven't given up on creating a safe climate future and looking after those wildlife species and places that they love, because they look at their politicians and lots of other community leaders and they do get that sense. And I think that in order for us to pass the baton on to the next generation, we have to show them that there's hope in this space. And for me, I just have, you know, I choose optimism every day, and that keeps me going. But for other people, I see that there is despair, and it breaks up our movement. And those people that we need to be standing with us so that we can make the change that we need to make need to be able to choose optimism as well. And I think it's absolutely critical that we take the genuine grief and hardship that people are experiencing into account and use it to be able to communicate effectively with people who are experiencing that, as much for those individuals as for the sake of our movement.
Great, thanks, Jess. Maybe we'll move on to another question, but yeah, definitely protecting mental health is so important, just even to avoid burnout from those of us doing the work, not to mention the impact that it has on those who experience the destruction of the environment firsthand. We had a great question come in from Andrea, well, several great questions coming in from Andrea, and I'll open this one up to everybody. How do we give Labour the confidence to use their huge mandate of support towards climate action? And then I guess kind of connected to that, Andrea's also asked, how can we get through to MPs? So yeah, maybe if anybody who feels like jumping in with an answer to that sort of strategy question.
It's a tough election to be working as an advocate in, because we have a government, an incumbent premier who's experiencing unheard of levels of popularity. And that means that there really isn't much of a contest between the political parties. The premier is actually now, I think, even saying that he's not going to have a debate with the leader of the opposition, and basically they think they're going to cruise to power very easily. What that means is Labor is actually going after votes that they've never had before. They're going after probably some of Colin Barnett's voters, and they're trying to appeal in some ways to those conservative voters, and that doesn't help us either. But I will say that that's the reason why some of our campaigns for some time now have been focusing at appealing to people from all parts of the political spectrum. And the Clean State campaign in particular has been focusing on appealing to those people who are not necessarily traditionally Green or Labor voters, but actually in more conservative electorates. And we've been getting a huge amount of support from those areas. And I think we're starting to see that in the policy announcements that are coming from some of the political parties. The Liberals have actually got a fairly strong position on climate change. I think that's going to be strengthened even further. We've seen the Nationals come out with really strong funding measures for conservation and natural resource management and those kinds of programs just recently. And they are really putting Labor on notice that they need to pick up their game, and they can't just cruise through and just not pay attention to these issues. I think when we get support from the conservative political parties, from the Nationals and from the Liberals, it really makes these issues bipartisan support, which is what we need to aim for, right? We've got to get the politics out of these issues to some extent and make sure that we can get bipartisan support for action on climate change. And I think, to some extent, this is an opportunity to do that at this election. But yeah, it is very challenging because of those reasons that I've mentioned. But that doesn't mean that we should give up. We should still keep in touch and contact our candidates, especially in those marginal seats, which is the ones that Labor government think it can win more of. All politics is local politics. So that means be in contact with your local member of parliament, send them, the information that you've had this evening and the publications that we're presenting, and ask them what their commitment to it is and what they're doing about it.
Fabulous. Thanks, Pierce. I've got a question next for Patrick from the Wilderness Society. Does the Wilderness Society support establishing a Hills Act to conserve the ecology and environmental health of the Perth Hills? And this question comes from Ailsa Patterson.
Without having too much knowledge of the proposed act, I think in principle, yeah, we wouldn't have any objection to the importance of recognising the quite localised biodiversity hotspots within that region. And also, I think the events of last week illustrated the innate danger of unmitigated climate change on those areas, on the peri-urban fringe. The fact that in a lockdown that sent everyone to the shops on a Sunday, the fact that was the second item in the Metro News, and there was 15 minutes of bushfire coverage before we got to the numbers of COVID cases, indicates the heightened sense of anxiety we've got on around a particular fire event. But I think the recognition that we are encroaching as a society into areas that previously were considered, in some terms wilderness, but certainly that native bushland that requires far greater protection. Happy to chat offline around the particulars of the proposed act.
Thanks, Patrick. Great. I've got a question. Maybe this is a good one for Jess or you again, Pat. This is coming from Jane Hutchinson. What is your view on Alcoa's proposal to expand its Huntley bauxite mine, resulting in the clearing of further large areas of Jarrah forest and the dwelling up Serpentine and Jarrahdale areas?
Pat and I will probably both want to speak to this, I'd say, but yeah, obviously we're fiercely opposed to the expansion, and I think it's important to note that all three of the aluminium refineries in the southwest all make WA's top 10 list of the most carbon polluting projects in Western Australia, and not when you combine them, each of them separately make that top 10 list. So this is a massive contributor to the carbon pollution in Western Australia. And that doesn't take into account the incredible loss of those jarrah forests, both in terms of the biodiversity, the forest that we love, and the climate value that they have in continuing to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So the fact that they're planning to expand in the current circumstances that we find ourselves in, I think is particularly odious, but also it gives us the best opportunity that we've had in a generation to do something about this. There's been a State Agreement Act for Alcoa since 1961 to continue to clear the jarrah forest for aluminium production, and now they're sending more and more of it overseas for offshore development. So, you know, in terms of the argument that it's good for jobs in the economy is fast reducing in its capacity to hold water. So there's some amazing groups in the region who've been working incredibly hard for decades to try and prevent this, and WA Forest Science and Wilderness Society and other groups are starting to back them, probably too late. I think we're all feeling a little bit like there's been some people there who've battling it far too hard for far too long. So we want to get behind them as strongly as we can, and we encourage everybody else to do so too. There's going to be good processes this year for us to coordinate campaigns around, but it's not just going to be the EPA processes and other sort of regulations that we're going to use. It's going to be about community really getting involved and making it very clear to the state government that this is unacceptable.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks for the question. Just to echo a lot of what Jess said, and I'll sound like a bit of a broken record. Hello, there you go. Look, those state agreements were developed and provided to Alcoa when we were sending men to the moon. They have absolutely no place in the modern day. And I keep coming back to what I think is a logical position that if we were to undertake that process now, if the government were to negotiate with Alcoa, it wouldn't be structured in that fashion. There's really no recourse for the scale of destruction and that proposed expansion. So we've had fierce opposition to that proposed expansion that's gone to the EPBC and the EPA, and will continue to do so with those next steps of that process through the course of this year.
Thanks, Pat and Jess, for answering that last question. I've got one in the chat now coming in from Anthony Collins. It's got multiple parts. I'll just read through it, and I think this is for the entire panel to discuss. WA's most polluting project, Chevron's Gorgon facility, is unable to meet its requirements to sequester roughly 40% of the total carbon dioxide it has produced over its initial 5-year period. What does the panel think is the likely consequence from the state government on this failure to meet ministerial conditions? And will the panelists be calling on the government to make Chevron offset all 7 million tons of the emissions they have failed to bury and shut down production at the Gorgon facility whenever its carbon capture system is out of use? So yes or no, I guess, or maybe we can have a more general discussion. But yeah, there's their question from Anthony.
I'll just make a couple of points about that. Firstly, thanks, Anthony, and congratulations for your ongoing work around these huge polluting LNG projects. It's been a lonely kind of campaign for the Conservation Council working on this for a long time, but now we're seeing people like 350 and Anthony joining in, and lots of other organisations. So that's really great. Yeah, the Chevron Gorgon facility, it produces about 10 million tonnes of CO2 per year. It was very controversial when it was originally approved. The Conservation Council campaigned against it, and the EPA recommended against it. But it did get approved with the condition that they pumped some of their carbon pollution underground on Barrow Island, called carbon capture and storage. This is a technology that the gas industry and fossil fuel industry have for decades said is, going to be their solution to climate change. And we're still seeing that come from the Morrison government with the, they're saying that it's okay, we can continue expanding the gas industry, we can have a gas-led recovery, we can have fracking in the Kimberley and in the Northern Territory, but it's okay because we'll have carbon capture and storage. Well, the one example of carbon capture and storage that we've tried to initiate here has been a complete failure, and that's on Barrow Island by Chevron. it's not only been a complete failure in terms of the capturing and storage of the carbon, but it's been a complete failure in terms of the regulatory arrangement to hold that company to account to make sure that they do that. They haven't been held to account at all. And as a result, we're seeing millions of extra tons of carbon pollution going into the atmosphere. Their conditions require them to offset that in some other way, which can be done through tree planting or investing in renewable energy or other things that create jobs and cut pollution. But the Minister, Stephen Dawson, hasn't held them to account, and the EPA hasn't enforced those conditions. We hope that they will, and we keep chipping away at that and exposing that as a problem. But in the meantime, Chevron are getting away with making huge profits, not providing really any benefits to the state. They hardly pay any tax or royalties, and they're just adding to our pollution burden. So yeah, it can't go on, and we need governments to be at the least enforcing the conditions that are put on these projects. And we would say strengthening them to require them to achieve net zero emissions immediately. And actually, we need to be phasing these industries out and phasing out our gas exports and replacing it with much more sustainable alternatives that produce more jobs and better economic benefits for our state.
Do any other speakers want to jump in on this one? No, great. Okay, thanks, Pierce. That was a great answer. I've got kind of a tough one here, I think maybe for Martin, but feel free, anybody, to jump in. So I'll just read it out how it was written. Energy Minister Johnson has publicly stated that he is proud to support the self-determination of First Nations peoples, and so will not support a ban on fracking, thus stopping communities from negotiating with the mining companies for jobs and social economic benefits. So what is our role as environmental organizations in that? And the way the question is worded is, how do we counter that? And are there communities that actually want fracking?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Yes, there are a couple of traditional owner groups that have decided to allow fracking on their country, and we do have questions around free, prior, and informed consent. So what we do know is that traditional owners are not always given the best information, and obviously the other thing is that some traditional owner groups do, you know, that there's this history of colonization that means that there is significant social issues, significant poverty, and sometimes people, they see you know, big dollars from fracking companies, and they decide that they'll go with that. And I guess, you know, there's a lot of things that you could talk about there, including how real is the what the mining companies are saying, what the fracking companies are saying, and what are the actual benefits to traditional owners, and also what the impacts are going to be, because you know, we know, for example, that there's going to be some parts of the Kimberley that are going to be unlivable in the next 60, 70 years if we are going to continue on the current emissions trajectory. There's places like Fitzroy Crossing that are going to have days over 40 degrees for you know, 3/4 of the year. 220 days over 40 degrees is what's predicted for 2090. But you go to a Fitzroy Crossing and you talk to traditional owners there, they've got no idea that that's a possibility. So I guess from our point of view, what we're doing with traditional owners is working on the new economy. And at the moment, we've got a program where we're trying to get up social enterprises and supporting social enterprises so that traditional owners do have an economy and don't have to rely on oil and gas, fracking, mining dollars. They start to become self-sustaining on country, and it is so important for people to remain on country, and you know, we're working really hard for that. But yes, it does provide major challenges, and the other side of it is that the vast majority of traditional lands across the Kimberley that fracking is proposed on, the CEOs oppose it. So yeah, it's a really hard situation that we're in. But you know, why should traditional owners be in this situation in the first place? That's a major question that people need to ask. You know?
Can I just make a quick related point? I mean, we're one of the richest countries in the world. What kind of place are we? What kind of community are we if you know, traditional owners have to sacrifice their water, sacrifice their air, their health, and the climate in order to get some of the benefits that, you know, many of us all enjoy? I mean, this is an appalling situation that needs to be resolved, and allowing fracking on country is not the way to do that. And I just make the point about Aboriginal heritage protection as well. We currently have a very, very weak legal regime around Aboriginal heritage protection, and traditional owners don't have the rights to protect their Aboriginal heritage and their cultural heritage because they don't have the right of veto or the right to stop mining companies or fracking companies from damaging their cultural heritage. This is the oldest living culture on this planet. I mean, we've got to get better at this. So this is one thing that is absolutely critical, that the state government put in place legislation that complies with the international protocols we've signed up to, which require Aboriginal and traditional owners to have a veto right, a right of consent. And we know that Western Australians overwhelmingly support that. So it just needs to get done.
Thanks, Martin and Pierce, for your thoughtful answers to those questions. Pierce, I've got some questions for you about the nature of the polling that was done. Someone is asking, how do we get access to the polling data? Who did the polling, and how can we reassure the public that it was independent, even if it was commissioned by us?
Yeah, I did answer that in the questions, and a summary of the polling is contained in the document that we've released today, the vision for the future for Western Australia, also with the references to the companies that have done that polling for us. Yeah, they've been very big samples that they've used across all voter groups and across both metro and regional communities as well. And it's really interesting to show that strong support for action on climate change and those other things actually go across all of the voter groups. It's not unique to Labor voters or Liberal voters or Greens voters. It actually goes across all those voting groups. So it shows that all political parties should actually be taking action on these things to appeal to their own kind of voters. And it shows that there's a group of voters that are really willing to change their vote based on, you know, strong policies in these areas.
Thanks, Pierce. A bit of that was a repeat, but now hopefully everybody knows about the polling. So we're running to the end of our questions, but I do have a couple more. This next one comes from Fidalis. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Please let me know if I'm not. What are the top three climate adaptation actions that government should take? So you guys probably have kind of glossed over that in your presentations, but maybe if we could go around and get what your top three climate adaptations should be. Oh, a little bit of homework. I see Pat's eyes widen. You can say one, you can choose to skip. But yeah, I'll throw that to you guys.
You want to go first, Jess?
Sure. Yeah, Melissa, the things that come immediately to mind, although this isn't our sort of key area of campaigning, are that we need to have the most rapid as possible transition out of all fossil fuels. we also need to be protecting and restoring forest cover so that we can be removing as much carbon out of the atmosphere as possible. And I suppose the third would have to be something about bringing everybody along with us, so that this is a transition for WA that is held closely by the community. And that would be about a just transition for each of the sectors that we're talking about.
Just to add to those, I would certainly support those as they pertain to Ningaloo and Exmouth Gulf. I'd also say that not permitting industrial development in coastal areas is a really important decision from an adaptation point of view, because it locks you into long-term and often unpredictable, serious consequences. The more flexibility we have, the more we give nature space to adapt to what's already on track, in train, the better. And also to recognise that places like Exmouth Gulf are incredibly important for carbon sequestration, for blue carbon, seagrasses, mangroves, algal mats. Those systems are going to be incredibly important, even more important in future from a mitigation point of view as well as adaptation. Thanks. Good question.
And for me, it would be transition, protection and restoration.
Very succinct, Pat. For those who aren't across the kind of terminology, adaptation in kind of policy language means adapting to the changes that are now locked in relation to climate change. And it's slightly different to mitigation, which is cutting pollution so that we don't make the problem worse. I think the first and most important adaptation thing is that we stop the loss and other impacts on habitat and biodiversity, because our wildlife and our biodiversity and our forests are going to be under massive pressure in the future with climate change. And we need to stop putting them under more pressure by logging and land clearing and all those other things. So it's the kind of things that we've been talking about. And a really key part of that is changing the way we manage fire, particularly in the southwest, because the prescribed burning regime we've currently got in place is drying out our forests and our woodlands and our landscapes. It's actually exacerbating the effects of climate change. What we need to be doing is investing much more in rapid response ability to put out fires when they're started, and there's going to be more of them in a hotter future, and less indiscriminate burning through prescribed burning of vast areas, which actually doesn't protect our communities very well and is causing really severe impacts on our environment.
Melissa, can I be, sorry, I'll be slightly less succinct. The other one that I know Anthony Collins is probably screaming at or about to type into the it doesn't necessarily sound environmental, but it actually is around electoral funding reform. So there's a balk when you speak to a member of the public about property developers, probably gambling companies contributing to political parties, but I think we need to think of the vast amounts of fossil fuel dollars in the same light. It's completely distorting government decision making. All of the proactive, positive ideas that have been raised this evening have huge multiplier effects to our economy going forward, and the fact that they're not being considered in the same light as the next big gas project really speaks to the power that sector has had over our politics at every level in Australia for a long time.
Thanks, Pat. Any final thoughts on this one? This was a great question before we move on. All right. Well, Jess, sorry, did you want to say something else?
Well, it was just occurring to me as we were all talking about that we need to look at it at a local level and a global level at the same time. And, my experience obviously is the Southwest Forest, and I think about the study that was done here in 2013 that showed that up to 62% of the rainfall decline in the Southwest is a result of land clearing. So, when we're talking about building resilience or adaptation, we know that we need to be looking after those the forest as a carbon store, but also obviously that blue carbon that Paul's talking about. Wherever we are on the globe, there's ways that we can be acting locally to build resilience and look after our our natural ecosystems and the wildlife and biodiversity that reside there. That will also, at the same time, when we do them well, have global implications that are positive. So I think that and then also there's those layers of governance and regulation, and also the ways communities act. So I think that the reason that question is so fantastic is because it reminds us that we've each got this capacity individually, but also at a local level as communities, to be doing really important things that help to look after our immediate area, that also then have those ripples out to a global level. So I think it really brings it home to all of us that we've got more power and more capacity to do things about this global problem than we might often think we do.
Great, thanks, Jess. Coming to the end of our time here, I did have one question that came in for Paul, just about the fact that oceans and the health of the oceans are so vital to our survival. What do you think blocks more significant action and protection of those ecosystems, given that we need them to be healthy to survive ourselves?
We certainly do, and I think we're seeing more and more interest from the broad community, the mainstream community, in ocean conservation, and the Cons Council umbrella policy platform for the election does contain elements around the ocean components, about ocean conservation more specifically, including on sharks and habitat protection more broadly. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. There just wasn't time to go into that tonight, but it absolutely is crucial, and it's building in profile, which is a great thing.
If I can butt in there, there's another question there before Melissa ends us, from Jane Bremer, which is about waste management and zero waste. And she's saying, do we see a role for the zero waste and circular economy movement in addressing climate, energy and environmental policy? Yeah, so I think you'll be pleased to see that's reflected in the documents as well. I think the waste area is one area that we've seen in the last couple of years, this overwhelming degree of public support for action on plastics and these sorts of things. And we have actually seen some progress with the government introducing a recycling refund scheme and various other initiatives to improve recycling, but we've got a lot further to go on that. And we actually need to be phasing out single-use plastic completely. And there's a lot of opportunities for Western Australia in a closed loop economy, a zero waste economy, where we recycle everything. And we can actually be recycling all kinds of things here, including lithium batteries and solar panels and e-waste, as part of a closed loop with our metals and minerals industries. So I think it's one of those ones that is really important, like Jess was saying, at a global level, but also presents opportunities here in WA.
Great, thanks, Pierce. I think that's all we're going to have time for this evening. Thank you all so much for coming. Before I let you go, I did just want to give you a little bit of homework for the evening. So candidates need to know that we support strong environmental protection and climate leadership. One action that you can take right now is endorsing plans discussed here tonight for conservation, climate action, and communities. You can do that by sending a ready-to-go email to your local candidates. I'm going to link that to you in the chat, or some of my colleagues might already be linking. We'll all link it. We'll spam you with it. It takes less than 2 minutes, and you can get started right away by searching on the form using your postcode. So just remember to share your action with others on social media and encourage them to do the same. This might seem like a really small thing, but it's a great way to get the word out that there are people out there who care, and yeah, build groundswell. So yeah, thank you all very much. Here's that link again. Be sure to click it. I'll give you a second before I close the chat, and yeah, feel free to come off mute and say goodbye. Thank you all very, very much.